Today, my presentation is basically about what I have done in my PhD study. And today, what I want to talk about is that about our research on how to understand test artifact quality in software engineering. And in this case, test artifact, what we mean by that is like test cases, test suite, test script, test code, test specifications. Yeah. And so first of all, what is this? I would like to talk about our motivation. So, I mean, it's very reasonable to argue that software testing provide means for you to understand the quality of the system on a test. And the core artifacts of software testing is also clear. This about test artifacts I mentioned before, which are test cases, test suite, test code, and specification, and so on. So there have been a lot of studies showing the benefits of having high quality test artifacts in the literature. So therefore, of course, it's important to produce, verify, and maintain high quality test artifacts. But then the question is that, so whose watch is the watchers? So what if there's some problem with the test artifacts themselves? And therefore, in my study, what we try to do is first to understand how to define and assess test artifact quality. And therefore, it is, of course, our argument ultimately is it's important to have an overview of test artifact quality as a whole. And since that's the motivation behind this research, so here actually this an overview of what we have done so far. And as you can see that there are two goals in this research. The first goal is to characterize test artifact quality. And we come with the second goal, which is kind of like by conducting one study, then we understand that, okay, this is also important to increase the reliability of such method in systematic literature review. So based on these two goals, there are 3 studies addressing those. And now we go to talk about the first one, which is to understand practitioners' perspective on test artifact quality. And the motivation for doing this is that little is known how practitioners themselves actually perceive test artifact quality. There have been a lot of studies actually that researchers involve practitioners, but actually that's based on their guidance too. I mean, the researchers' guidance. So practitioners themselves, how they perceive test artifact quality has not been well studied. That is the reasons for our first focus. And so what we did here is that we conducted an exploratory study with interviews. The important thing to emphasize here is that we ask practitioners in advance to classify test cases before the interviews. So they themselves, each of them choose 3 test cases that they familiar with, that they want to classify. So they did the classification in advance. And then in the interview, we swap the test cases so that we can guard the alignment. We can understand the alignment between practitioners in the interview, whether they have the same assessment or not. And so that's important to emphasize. And what we have received as like main result of this study is basically a quality model, including 11 quality attributes of test artifacts. And understandability has been considered as the most important one. And the context of this study is natural language test cases for embedded system. And we, of course, the studies is only with 6 practitioners from a company in Sweden. So it's just to help us to have an initial understanding of how test artifact quality is being understood by practitioners. And the important conclusion in this study, sorry, is that practitioners' background, including responsibility and experience, actually very important dimensions on how test case quality or test artifact quality is being defined and assessed. And if I go further in details, is as you can see here that we have, for example, like there's some test artifact quality attributes that are actually more related to test case execution. So meaning that if practitioners, their responsibility is about executing test cases, then they care more about understandability of the test case or the step cohesion in the test case itself. On the other hand, if practitioners cares more about broader tasks like design or maintenance of test cases, then they have other interest. For example, like the repeatability or traceability of the test cases. And of course, there are also other context dimensions that practitioners mentions. But here, I listed 3 that they mentioned explicitly. That first one is the maturity level of the system of the test. The second one is testing level. And the third one is the correlated knowledge. So one example is that they mentioned, for example, we explore exploratory testing. So we're talking about testing level here. They say that actually they prefer the flexibility in the test case itself, because so for them that if the test case has really restriction in the steps to perform, then they consider that's not so good test case. So that is the outcome of the first study. And then when we, so now for us to, in order to obtain a broader view of test artifact quality, what we did in the next step is that we conducted a tertiary study, and instead of doing a secondary study, the reason is that we found that there are actually a lot of secondary study on the topic already, but of course there's no agreement so far on the quality models or how to assess, basically how to assess and define test qualities among those secondary study. And they these second studies can talk about specific part of the some context dimensions. For example, about exploratory testing for web application software. And then there are other secondary studies talking about GUI testing for in unit test case, for unit test cases. So our idea is that we want to identify all of them and synthesize the information. And this one, this first picture is actually to show an overview of the secondary study that we have collected. Basically, we got 49, and so far, as you can see, that actually SERL is the most popular type of study that we have identified, and the number of studies actually increased over time. And what we for the synthesis, so what we did is that we gather information about test artifact qualities and quality measurements as well from the secondary studies, but for the sake of simplification, I just show the list of quality attributes that we have collected. And also it's worth emphasize here that we also make use of the ISO standard for software quality, because that's very relevant to what we're doing. And we try to understand, or at least using our understanding, to see whether there's some quality attributes which could be relevant for test artifact quality assessment as well. So for example, we have here, satisfaction. So these are actually from the ISO standard, but we include them to provide actually a more broader view of test artifact quality. And so our conclusion here is that we believe that this quality model can be used to support practitioners with assessing and improving test artifact quality, at least the initiatives. And also this model can be used as a framework for documenting test context characteristics. So that would be useful for both practitioners and researchers. So these are the highlights of the second study. Now coming to the third study. So this basically that when we conducted the tertiary study, so we use quasi-gold standard approach to verify the search results. And by doing that, then we see that, okay, there's some issue with that approach, or like there's some issues with that when you use the approach, and therefore we want to invest further on that. And that's the motivation for the SERL study. And so what we did is basically for this quasi-gold standard approach, we use another tertiary study, a relevant one, to build our quasi-gold standard. And just to clarify, the quasi-gold standard in this case is just a subset, or it should be a representative subset of the gold standard of all, meaning all relevant studies of your systematic literary review. So the idea is that if you ideally, if you manage to identify or study from the quasi-gold standard, then you can be confident that your search results is good enough so that you can proceed with data analysis. And what we did here is that we conducted three searches, and this one is about the other tertiary study that we used to build our quasi-gold standard. And here we compare the search strings to understand, okay, this is our first step, what's the difference between our search strings and the search strings from the other tertiary studies. And we, so as a result, what we got here, to clarify also that the second search is actually a pilot one. Therefore, at the end, we don't make use of that. And also the results of the second search is basically a subset of the third one. So here we don't discuss the second search anymore. We have the first one, first search, and the search results of that, the other tertiary studies or the reference. And here, the red shape here is basically to show that the distribution of the quasi-gold standard papers among all the three searches. As you can see, actually, so in this case, this means that by using the first search and the third search, we miss one paper from the quasi-gold standard, which was identified by the other tertiary study. And they just like to give you an overview of how we compare the search results. And basically what we have learned from that is that, I shouldn't use this animation. Anyway, so what we have learned is that there are actually three main issues that might affect the search completeness. The first thing is about the use of generic search terms together with the pooling operator and. So based in more details, in our case, we realized that this tertiary study, they use AND software in their search. And that's the reasons why they, there's some papers, of course, relevant, but the AND software narrow down the results, or like kind of like, not kind of, but basically exclude relevant studies. Because I mean, not all papers use software in their titles to talk about software engineering. And the second issues we identified is basically the use of subject area search filter. So what we see here is that in Scopus, if you, let's say, because you can use this filter to limit the search results to, let's say, computer science, and ignore engineering or medical fields. But the problem is that we see sometimes the filter was not performed accurately. Therefore, there's some relevant papers got classified to, let's say, even to medical, while the topic is actually about software engineering. So, and the third issue here, which is also very important, is about the quality of the quasi-gold standard itself. So what we would like to, what the conclusions, also our recommendations based on our experience by doing all of this analysis, is that so it's important for researchers to actually analyze the search results as well, because that will help you to identify two things. The first thing is that whether the quasi-gold standard is actually good enough, but what if it's missed some important relevant papers? So maybe you want to update your quasi-gold standard. And the second, or the opposite route, is that whether your search results actually really missed relevant papers and whether there's some reasonable reasons for that. Like, for example, if you want, of course, it's all about human resource. So you want, that the subject area such filter might have some problem, but if that helps you to limit 10,000 papers and that you don't have enough time to do extra work, then maybe you need to understand the trade-off and be aware of that. So the second thing is that about the quasi-gold standard quality. So we have seen that there are a lot of papers talking about the size of quasi-gold standard, but we argue that this is not enough as a desirable quality characteristic. Besides size, there should be about diversity and the relevant as well. Relevant is obvious. This means that the quasi-gold standard should include relevant papers for your search topic, but diversity means that it should actually, like, for example, cover different research communities or different search engines or databases. That's also because ultimately what you want to do is to have a representative set of your gold standard, and so be aware of that. And also in our paper, we provide suggestions on how to construct that, like such representative quasi-gold standards. So how researchers should, where you should stop and is it good enough for you? So yeah, but since this too much in details, I would just say that please read the paper. Maybe that's motivation. And so basically that is an overview of all 3 studies that we have conducted. And here I would like to, of course, talk about the future work. And first, I would like to show you first that, so this is the list of all quality attributes that we have identified. So from chapter 3, the green one here is from the tertiary study, and chapter 2 is basically the interview studies. And then for the others, actually papers which practitioners, practitioners got involved in the discussion about test artifact quality. So as you can see here that if we just consider practitioners' opinions, then there are quite a lot of quality attributes that have not been mentioned by them based on. So the
I just need a second. Yeah.
You're not the only one. So what I'm trying to say here is that here we see the practitioners' opinions from the those papers. From the second one to the right side, there are a lot of quality attributes that have been mentioned by practitioners, and so that makes us think whether if practitioners are aware of more quality attributes, would they discuss about them as well? Because what we have learned from this interview study is that they mentioned, understandability is the most important one. But what if they were aware of others? Would they pick understandability still, or they pick something else? That is why we conduct. That's a motivation for our future work. So what we want to do here is that so for the future work, we have 3 research questions we want to answer. And the first one is that whether we want to understand that, now practitioner, if we give them the full list of quality attributes, can them pick which one they think relevant but challenging for them to deal with? And then we want to understand as well that how the test artifact quality could be assessed based on the selected quality attributes by practitioners. And also for the last research questions, what we want to understand is that whether there's a trade-off between test quality attributes. So just mean, for example, if you want to increase the understandability of your test suite or test cases, would that affect the traceability or, I don't know, reusability of your test cases? Yes. Yeah. So And what we want to do here is that to answer the research questions number 4, what we would like to do now is to conduct a survey. I will go in more details with that one. And then based on the results of the research question 4, we want to create a systematic checklist that practitioners can make use of that in their inspection process of test artifact quality. And then, of course, then they would also receive information about the trade-off between the test artifact qualities when they do the inspection. So ultimately, that's we think that's the final contribution of the research. And now, talking about the survey study. So this one, we are working on this now, and therefore it would be really nice also to have your opinions on that. So here we have the sub-research questions, but basically I explained before what we want to understand is, okay, practitioners, which one do you think are relevant? Which quality attributes you think relevant for your context, of course, and which one you think are challenging for you to deal with, and also what current support that you have. So currently we plan is that we would use LinkedIn, and there's a paper talking about a systematic approach to use LinkedIn to make sure that you get a broader sample for your survey. And for administration of the survey, we use Unipark or Unipark. Yeah. And for data analysis, we're thinking to use the $100 test and CODA framework. This is from Panayota, and I have just learned about that. So more input from you would be also good. I don't have much experience with that yet. We have been in contact with Panayota as well, so we see what we get more advice from her. And so basically that's the whole presentation is about. So thank you so much for listening. Yeah, please, have any questions?